Hi, I'm Tim Belcher and welcome to my foyer. We'll get to the shop in just a minute. I've got some friends who just bought a house and they wanted a moderate size signature dining room table. We went to our local hardwood dealer and looked around all sorts of options, and we stumbled across these 12-foot, 5 to 6 inch wide Ambrosia maple boards. Not only do they have a beautiful grain pattern, they have a lot of beetle damage and work that adds a lot of color and characteristic to the wood. We were able to make this table with some inexpensive Amazon legs, all for around $400. So stick around, an Ambrosia maple farmhouse table. This is how I made it.
The first step was to break down 3 of these boards to form the main glue up, or the field of the table, if you will. Alex, whose table this will be, joined me in the shop for much of this build, and it was nice to have a second set of hands as we're moving these 12-foot planks around. And while these boards were reasonably straight, 1 or 2 did have a slight twist to them. So we grabbed the long planer sled with carpet tape on it and used shims to get one side of each board flat. Then we could run the flat side down to get both sides coplanar. And that would get us stock that we could use with a track saw to get one edge straight. Then we could use that edge with the table saw to get the second edge square. We wanted the total length of the table to be just over 6 feet, and we knew we'd have around 10 inches of breadboard ends. So that's why these may look a little short. We're going to be using dominoes for alignment. Alex had never used one, so I showed him how to do the first, and he was off and running. 2 people in the shop, the glue up was almost uneventful. We glued up 2 sections of 3 before combining them, and then we were able to take our time applying even pressure as we closed the gaps. We let it bake for a day, and we had a very flat panel with no gaps whatsoever. We scraped some glue off and went to work rough sanding it to 80 grit. It was time to work on the breadboards, which I should have done while I was working on the field to make sure they were the same thickness. But these were just over 36 inches long and much easier to handle with one person. The only difference here is that I was able to use my joining sled to get that first edge square. Fairly simple cuts on the track saw to both ends of the field to get those edges square. Then I could start fitting and laying out the breadboard ends. I'll be using dominoes for the breadboards as well, something I first saw on John Malecki's channel. He credited Marc Spagnuolo from The Wood Whisperer. I'll link both their videos below, but I'll be doing this a bit different and try and create less stress during wood movement. I've done the dominoes for the table ends on the tight setting, and I am pre-gluing the dominoes there in place. The breadboards, I'll use the medium setting on the inner 2 and loose for the outer 4. The idea there is to pin those dominoes in place, but let the dominoes slide within the mortises for wood movement. I will let those dominoes cure completely in the table ends before continuing on with installing the breadboards. Here's where I wasted a lot of time. There was one knot hole I needed to fill and around 100 or so bug holes. I thought using a copper-colored resin might work well, but many of those bug holes went through the boards, so I needed to tape the undersides. And in the end, you can't really see the color, so I think I would have been better off using wood filler. After sanding off the resin, I dry fitted the breadboard ends and placed the entire table under clamping pressure using the CNC bed and some flat clamps. This will position my pins in the breadboards as tight as I need them. I'm setting my depth on the bit to make sure I go through the tenons and into the bottom side of the breadboard, but not all the way through. And while it's under pressure, I go ahead and drill all the holes for the pins on both sides. I can now put the table back on standoffs and remove the breadboards to work on the actual tenons. Here's what I do differently and what I think makes this connection more stable when the wood moves. I'm carefully widening the holes in the tenons, making sure I try to keep the drill straight up and down and rock only side to side. That should provide room for the tenons to move horizontally while allowing the pins to remain rigid and keeping the breadboard tight to the table. I decided some good long-grain walnut dowels would look nice for the pins. I've got this dowel cutting bit, but it does generate an amazing amount of heat. But it worked. And it's now time to attach the breadboards. If there were an odd number of boards, I would have fixed the center tenon tight and glued on both sides of the joint. Since there were 6, I simply glued the first inch or so of the center boards and left all the tenons able to move slightly. I placed the pins in just more than halfway and then glued the tips before driving them all the way in. This attaches the pins to the top of the breadboard, but not to the tenon itself. I flipped the table around and repeated the process. Then flush cut them with a pull saw. This is just a gratuitous shot of one of those times in a build where you get a lot of payoff for little work, sanding these flush and seeing the breadboard for the first time. I was very happy with the result. So I'm skipping a lot of the sanding here, taking the table up to 220 grit. I rounded the corners of the table slightly with a sander and broke the edges and cleaned up those corners by hand. Now on to the finish. I chose polyacrylic and it was too cold in the shop, so I chose to use our dining table. My wife didn't seem to mind much and actually helped me set it up. I would talk about how I applied it, but I sort of suck at applying finish. I feel like my final 2 coats were decent. Instead, I'll pimp my channel for a bit. If you like this video, please hit that subscribe button. It would help me out quite a bit. I think that is the single biggest thing viewers can do for a small channel. Thanks, and back to the build. In the end, I did 3 coats on the bottom and 4 on top. As I mentioned, Alex picked up these legs on Amazon for around $100. There are all sorts of designs available, but these worked out well. The boards we purchased from the hardwood dealer were around $80 each. So with the legs and the finish, we're still well below $400. To me, and hopefully Alex, that seems like a good value. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe.